Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in and having a great Thursday. I'm Jiaxing from the Google Developer Relations team, and welcome to our third edition of Startup Coffee Chat at Google Developer Space. Startup Coffee Chat is a monthly event to bring startups from across South and Southeast Asia to share best practices and learn from one another. This month's topic is on user acquisition. And today we are super excited to have with us, firstly, Arun Kumar, Director of Growth Marketing at Carousell. Arun oversees Carousell's user acquisition and retention efforts. Prior to joining Carousell, he was at Zalora, where he managed the social and mobile marketing teams. Next, we have Harry Tan, Growth Manager at Google. His expertise is in brand and mobile performance marketing, and he helps mobile and games app developers across South and Southeast Asia to grow more effectively with Google Ads. And the session will be moderated by Laura, our Developer Community Manager at Google. Laura is based in Indonesia and takes care of professional developer communities and social media marketing. Prior to that, she was at Singapore-based venture capital Monk's Hill Ventures, where she built community outreach for startups across Southeast Asia and helped their business grow at scale. For today's session, we'll be discussing strategies on how startups can lower the acquisition cost of new users, retain existing ones, reduce user churn rate, and many more. Harry will kickstart today's session with a 10 minutes presentation, and after that, we'll move on to a panel discussion. You're welcome to submit your questions on our YouTube or Facebook live chat, and we'll do our best to answer them during the Q&A. So without further ado, let's welcome Harry to the stage. So for Harry's presentation today, he'll be sharing how you can find valuable users with Google's app campaigns and measurement solutions. The stage is yours, Harry.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jiaxing. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Harry from Google Ads team in Singapore. I work with mobile game and app developers across Southeast Asia and South Asia to help them find success with Google Ads. So for today, I will be sharing with you how you can find valuable users with app campaigns and measurement solutions. So before app campaigns, to advertise on google.com, you had to figure out all the keywords your users would search for and determine what cost per click made sense. For YouTube, you think about what audience and demographics would be interested in your app. For display, you think about audiences and context that make sense. All this takes time and adds complexity, taking time that you could use to further develop your app or your business. Rather than managing multiple campaigns and manually optimizing them across different channels and contexts, app campaigns does this automatically with a single campaign that does all the heavy lifting for you. So Google has several channels where people are discovering apps with Google. Users are discovering apps while watching videos on YouTube, checking emails, reading articles, and more. That's why we built app campaigns to automatically reach billions of users, whether they are on Google Play, Gmail, Google Search, YouTube, or the over 2 million sites and apps in the display network. Part of the beauty of app campaigns is that it learns and gets smarter with every impression as people start to engage with your ads. For example, you may learn that users who watch travel videos on YouTube convert better for you. So we will show more of your ads on those type of YouTube channels. Or if you get more value from our new ad placements on the Play homepage, then we will divert more of your budget there. So app campaigns will help you find the right users on the right channel at scale. And get your campaign running is fairly straightforward in these following 4 steps. I will be going through with you these steps one by one. So the first one is to select a campaign type that matches your goal, whether it's driving more installs to your app or driving users to complete actions that are more relevant to your business or driving user engagement. So there are three major campaign types: app campaign for install and install advanced, app campaign for action, and app campaign for engagement, each serving a different purpose. And there are some best practices when you set up your campaign speed and budget. So make sure that you have a daily budget to allow at least 100 installs or 20 times in-app events per day so that the machine learning algorithm can learn and optimize effectively. And don't make any changes to bids and budget before the first 100 conversions and the full week for the new campaigns. And setting your cost per setting your CPA bid higher will result in a faster ramp up. So we see most success with a bid of 1.5 to 2 times your cost per action goal. And to ensure stable transition when adjusting bids, make sure that you minimize the bids and budget adjustment no more than 20% every few days. And fluctuations will be expected when you launch the new app campaign, but it will smooth over the time. And if you are planning to run iOS campaigns, it's recommended that you set 1.5 times compared to Android. So now you choose your campaign objective and set the bids and budget. The next step is for you to create and upload your creative assets. There are three major types of creative assets: text, video, and images. So once you have uploaded all these creative, system will automatically generate ads and show them on the possible inventories like YouTube, AdMob, Google Search, and Google Display Network. Last but not least, make sure that you set up conversion tracking that covers your needs, whether it's Google Analytics for Firebase or the third-party app attribution partners like AppsFlyer, Adjust, AppSalatun, or Kochava, so that you know how many users you acquire from what type of channel, and then how's their retention, and then how does the users perform different events within your app or your game. So this is typically what you will be expecting when you launch your first app campaign. So app campaign will establish boundaries, then identify patterns. So as you can see in the first 2 weeks, the number of conversions may be changing a lot. And then the CPI, the cost per install, may be higher than your targeted cost per install or lower. But after a learning phase of 1 to 2 weeks, the campaign will likely become more stable. And then the CPI price will be getting closer to your targeted CPI price. And then you will be able to consume your daily budget more smoothly as well. So this is how you can set up your first app campaign. This is what you will see on your Google Ads dashboard. So find your iOS app or your Android app, give it a campaign name, set up a country you want to target, specify the language you want to target, set up a daily average budget, and choose your campaign objective, and then put on a start and end date. Once that is finished, you will be asked to upload your creative assets. So for images, videos, and HTML5 playable ads, so in each ad group, you will have up to 20 slots. And you can see these are some of the recommended ratios when you plan to upload your image, video, or HTML5 playable ads. So as a quick summary, Google App Campaigns is easy to set up, simple to manage, and effective at driving results. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Harry. That was a very informative presentation on app campaigns. And thank you for highlighting the things that I'm pretty sure professionals who are working in startups should take note when they are setting up campaign strategy. So I would like to invite Arun to join us.
Hello,
Hi, Arun. How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
I'm good.
Yeah, hi, Arun.
Hey, Harry. Hey, Laura.
Thank you very much to both of you for joining our Startup Coffee Chat today. There are a lot of questions submitted by our startup communities, and I'm sure there will be a lot of valuable insights that our audience can learn from both these individuals who have tons of experience in growing startups. And before we start our panel discussion, just wanted to give a quick hello and a big shout out to all our audience here, all our viewers joining today. Wherever you are tuning in, a very warm welcome. And if you have any questions, please do submit your questions in the live chat, both from Facebook and YouTube, and we will try to answer them right after our panel discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to ask the first question to Harry. What should startups do to make their app campaigns stand out? And if there is any examples you can share, I know you have presented before, but if you can help clarify based on your experience.
Yeah, so I think for app campaigns, the key focus that you should focus on for startup companies is that focus on the in-app events that matters for your business. So make sure that you have a proper analytics tool where you can analyze the user behavior. And then if you were to run user acquisition campaigns, so you should really identify the events that matters to a business. So say, for example, if for games, you're trying to acquire more users to make in-app purchase in your game, then the in-app purchase event may be more valuable for game partners. So for travel apps, maybe getting users to booking their to make a booking in the app is more relevant. So the booking event will be the key business event that matter to the business. So I think to make the most of the app campaigns, it's really recommended for you to start tracking all your important business related events so that in the future you could set up new campaigns that can target such events so that new users you acquire will likely to complete similar events.
Got it. I think that's pretty important. The point that you were highlighting on tracking so that new user can also experience the same thing. I would also like to ask Arun, based on your experience at Carousell, could you share some examples of low cost and effective marketing efforts when Carousell is still at a very early stage startup?
Yeah, for sure. So when you talk about digital channels, and maybe Carousell has been around for like 7-8 years now. So in our very early stages, it wasn't so much about driving installs or users by paid channels. Initially, it was more about word of mouth, organic channels, relying on a bit of SEO and actually engaging our users to become referrers for their friends, families to come on board and then start using the app. So when we did start paid acquisition, we didn't have all the incredible stuff that Harry talked about in his first few slides, where all your audiences and your targeting gets automated through machine learning. We actually had to do a lot of our own studies to understand, like, what is the ideal user for the app first? How do we find more of these users? Which channels can we find these users in? And I think that's where our focus was more on, instead of just going for the most low cost channel, because a low cost channel doesn't necessarily mean that you are effectively driving in, users of quality who will be active on the platform. So the easy answer well, there's no easy answer for that, but I would say instead of just going for a channel that might drive you the cheapest install, you really need to focus on the events. Like Harry mentioned, like what is the event that's going to be most useful for your business objective, and focus on driving users who will actually take that action within your app. Yeah.
When you are talking about you are doing a lot of research and during the early stage, do you mind to share about the evolution of marketing strategy across stages for startups who are still in early stage? What would be the strategy in the first 2 to 3 years and also now?
Sure. I think the strategy and the runway should obviously be different for every startup and the business and the industry that they belong to, right? Ultimately. So when we think about it, you initially have a growth strategy with an objective of driving X amount of active users by a certain time frame. This could be within a year, this could be within 2 years or 3 years, and so on. I think in each phase, you need to first understand what is it that you need. If it's active users that you need, then you need to focus on both acquisition and retention. So a combination of both, like driving in quality users and thinking about mechanisms within your app and your CRM strategy to keep them retained in the app. This actually doesn't change all that much as the years go on, because then you start introducing maybe new products within your app, or your app actually evolves as well. When these evolutions take place, you need to start going back and looking at whether the audience that you are acquiring actually makes sense for your business as well, or maybe you need to start acquiring a different kind of demographic for your app. Give you an example about Carousell. Carousell, when we first started off, we were really just focused on the younger millennials, more focused on the fashion categories. But if you talk about Carousell today, we are now in property as well. We are in cars, autos, and services even, right? So this means that it's no longer your fashion buyer demographic or sellers who will also naturally be interested in these categories. We had to sort of evolve our strategy, think about the channels where we can acquire these demographics as well, and then optimize on that basis. So I would say that's how our strategy has evolved. It's very much intertwined with our business objectives and the products that we are launching within the app.
Yeah, the growth of Carousell is impressive. And now I would like to ask from both of you, the cost of acquiring new users has increased over the years. So what are some ways startups can reduce the cost of user acquisition? Probably can start with Harry, and then we would like to hear from also you, Arun.
Yeah, so I think I can speak more on how you could optimize for the app campaigns. So so if you're planning campaigns for a mobile app or a game, as I shared earlier, the key controls that you will have will be your CPI bid, your daily budget, and your creatives. So if you don't want to make too much changes to your bids and budget, the only thing that you can control will be creatives. So optimizing the creatives will be very important to reduce your cost of the user acquisition. Because if the image or the videos, so firstly for creatives, we recommend you to have like a broader coverage of all the different type of image and video creatives, and possibly playable ads. And secondly is to optimize these creatives so that they can drive the key ads related metrics such as click-through rate and conversion rate. Because based on our experience, we do see that different type of video and images tend to bring very different performances, and then good performing images and videos tend to lower your cost a lot. And then sometimes it may create viral factor to help you get bigger scale users at a cheaper or lower cost.
Yeah. So I completely agree with Harry here as well. I think creative is a good point to start with when you're trying to optimize and keep the costs down. I think more so than just the creative is the whole process of experimentation. You do need to test out different creatives, different value propositions, and see which one actually gels well with the audience, your target audience. And this needs to happen all the time. At Carousell, when we're running campaigns, the one thing that we are constantly doing is actually experimenting with both the copy, the creative, the setup, the budget allocation. I think even amongst the channels, we need to understand which channels are going to drive awareness for you, which one's going to drive direct response for you, and then focus on it from that point of view. But also, cost has been increasing regardless. I mean, the general cost, the CPMs and the CPIs and the CTRs will, sorry, not CTRs, the CPMs and the CPIs will always constantly be on the rise as, more people are competing for the same users. Ultimately, you still need to understand what is the action that you want to drive on your platform, right? So for us, we would maybe, for example, focus on driving users who will start a chat for the first time. So we will calculate our cost per acquisition of a first-time chatter. And that has got more impact on our business metric than just simply, say, driving an install and calculating the cost per install instead. So I would recommend that you have an understanding of which events are more important to you, make sure you have tracking set up for those events, and then optimize towards efficiency for driving more of those actions for that event type.
Yeah. Interesting. So earlier, Harry, you were mentioning how to make campaigns more targeted to the audience. And then Arun, you also share how Carousel is expanding the audience. But there is a dilemma on how to strike a balance between getting more users or acquiring the most valuable users for their business. So can you share on how should startup make strategy on this from both of you?
Yeah. So I think that really depends on the stage of the startup journey you are in, and then what's your key objective at different time frames. So say, for example, if your key objective is to get more users in order to increase your organic spin-off effect, right? So perhaps a massive user acquisition strategy works better for you. But if you're looking at the long-term view that you want most of the users that you acquired through paid marketing to stay longer in your app and then perform the key actions that you want within your app. So I would recommend that you focus more on driving quality users that will likely stay for the longer term and focus on the key business event within your app.
Yeah, so I agree with Harry as well. It's really, as he put it, question of whether you are in the early stages and more focusing on driving the scale versus when you are transitioning into more revenue driving activities, right? When you're more focused on driving revenue, then you are more keenly focused on driving users who will, have a much higher average revenue per user, ARPU, and then you'd start also calculating what's the cost of acquiring such a user. And naturally, you will see that cost for acquiring more valuable users would be higher, but the incremental returns on ad spend would be higher down the road. So this is more of like a calculation of your lifetime value of each user that enters the picture now. And I think it goes to the stage of the startup and when you want to start approaching when your focus shifts more towards profitability, basically.
Mm. Thank you for your answers. I think that is very insightful. There is also a question in which, when we adopt a strategy, whether it makes the team less agile, and also how can startups adapt to new market trends quickly, and how to decide the right strategy when there is a trend happening. Maybe Arun, you can share from your experience.
Yeah, this is quite a tricky question because it can be answered in many ways, but I'll take a stab at it. When it comes to acquisition strategies, again, I would recommend that you first look at what's your business objective, right? If your overall company objective is to drive X amount of active users by, say, the next 2 years, then you plot your trajectory in terms of what you need to deliver. And from there on, you break it down into your channels and then see, how much can you drive these users in each channel? What's your organic baseline? How does that ladder up to the goal, right? So based off of that, your acquisition strategy first needs to make sense. If these are the channels that you're going to be focusing in, right? And I guess the strategy should work from the point where your acquisition team, your growth team within your startup needs to be, first of all, fully aligned with your business objective. So I'm assuming there are founders and business leaders for all of these startups in listening in here as well. You guys need to make sure that the alignment is there first of all. Without that alignment, then you can't expect your team to be agile. When it comes to agility, your teams also need to be set up and should have the knowledge of how to switch between channels, because no one channel is always going to be efficient for you all the time, right? Because there'll always be shifts in consumer trends. Maybe, the demographic that you want to go after might have been exhausted in a social channel. How would you then pivot? Your team needs to start thinking about these things and have diverse channel options to acquire users from different sources, rather than just also betting on one. I think the Google product, for example, makes it easy, right? Your app campaigns, it goes through multiple Google channels, not just display, but video and search as well. So that makes things easier. But ultimately, make sure that you are sure that you've got diverse options to begin with. That should not stop the team from being agile. When it comes to adapting to new trends, I think it's really about keeping abreast of the developments in the space, right? And I think, at least in the app space, there's a lot of things happening there. Everything from, tracking users to the privacy policies and the device ID situations. These are things that definitely influence the way you market, the way you remarket to these users as well. So keeping like a track of these things and also having a deep understanding of the channels will definitely help any team adapt to changes.
Interesting. I'm going to ask you questions that we received from the registrations from our audience. So, Arun, you were earlier sharing about how Carousell at the early stage is using organic routes to reach out to acquire more new users. So, in this COVID situation, what would be the key organic routes that startups can try to reach out to? And because right now, most people are not allowed to go outside as often.
Yeah, I mean, that's the nature of digital channels, right? You don't need to go out to reach them. I think what you do need to do is understand where your consumers are. Um, Consumer trends have actually really changed quite a bit during the COVID situation. If you think about it, I'm sure most of you have experienced like different versions of your lockdowns or your circuit breakers in your respective countries. Um, and typically, when you're in a lockdown, you tend to be more on your mobile or actually more on your TV these days. So, in some of our markets, what we've noticed is that the traffic to mobile or apps in general has gone down, whereas desktop traffic has increased. And then when we look at macro trends for that market when it comes to platform behavior, it's quite consistent as well. So you need to be cognizant of like how these changes are taking place as well. So then you can craft your strategy to reach out to these users in those channels during these uncertain and changing times. And I think you no longer need to worry about going out anymore, right? In a sense, because all these channels are online. I'm sure you can get in touch with your account managers via email as well. And these are things that are easily taken care of. And when it comes to organic channels, I would definitely suggest looking at everything from your content. It starts off with content. So building up your SEO strategy, your content strategy, how does that organically attract more users to your mobile site? How do you translate your mobile traffic into app traffic? These are things that you can also think about. There are technologies out there that help you with that too. Yeah. I hope I answered that question.
Yes, I think the answer that I really like from your point that you made earlier is content, like the importance of content, where that can drive organic route, especially in COVID period. There's a lot of marketing efforts going on, so I think content is really important.
Yeah,
And
I think if you
yeah,
think about content as well, like a lot of people have got smart TVs, and I'll speak from experience. During the COVID period when I couldn't go out, I was just on my TV quite a bit. And where do I land up? I land up on YouTube on my smart TV, and if there was content or ads there, that's what I'll be seeing, not so much my phone anymore or my laptop. So it's good to think about the changing times and like consumer trends when you craft your content.
yeah, that's so true. Harry, do you have examples of growing users for B2B tools in a viral way? I know you talked about viral earlier. Can viral user acquisition only work for B2C products? What do you think?
Yeah. So what I can say is that the viral user acquisition really works well for the B2C products. A lot of partners I'm working with, the way when they focus on driving scale, say for example for mobile apps and games, when they focus on driving the install scale, there are chances where they can push their app to the top free or top grossing list, and then that's the time where they could increase their organic spin-off and get more amount of organic users. So for the B2B space, I'm afraid that I wouldn't be able to share with you much experience on this because most of the partners that I'm working with are focused on the B2C domain.
Got it. So for the next question, I would also like to ask from both of you. It's about growth versus brand building, and which one would you prioritize? At what stage? How do you measure and compare the performance of both? Maybe Arun, you can start. We can start with you.
Sure. I think if you look at most startups, initially in the scaling up period, like they tend to only focus on just driving users. Your creatives are also not very consistent, and then you might reach a certain stage where you have reached certain volume of users, and then typically that's when you will start hiring for a brand manager to come in, and then you'll sort everything out. But what I've always felt personally is that even when you are in your scaling phase, it's important to have like your key tenets as to what your brand is, what's your brand identity, not steering too much away from those things, because those tenets should also help you be true to your brand. Anything that you put out in your creatives will stay true to your brand. So I think those things should never be neglected, and I think all founders and all marketing leaders in the organization, as a small startup, you should be very focused on that. But when it comes to brand building, it's really a question about awareness at the end of the day, because direct response can only, again, in most cases, I feel, in my experiences, the direct response can only exhaust so much of your low-hanging fruit within your target audience. And on top of that, you do need to, change perceptions, sort of like change the mindsets of people who are in the outer reaches of that circle, who may not necessarily be convinced about your product and your services before you can convince them to become like loyal customers. So I do think that brand building takes a bigger focus after you've reached a certain scale. But it shouldn't stop you from thinking about it along the way, even when you're smaller. Yeah, that's my answer to that.
Yeah, totally agree with Arun. So like what we see for a lot of small and medium startups, when you are in the growth phase, perhaps there's more focus on the performance marketing. And then once you reach a certain growth stage, then it's the time for you to start experimenting with the branding type of campaigns. But along the way, you should never neglect the importance of branding. If you have the resources, you should really put it throughout your marketing strategy. And to measure, to compare the performance of both branding and non-branding metrics, I think the metrics you will be looking at will definitely be very different. For brands, you will tend to focus more on the unique reach, on the brand awareness, on ad recall, or how many people you have reached, and then how many people maybe like seeing your image or your video ads. However, for like non-branding campaigns, like for performance campaigns, and you will focus more on the key metrics like cost per install, cost per action, or how many users, like your App Store or Play Store ranking position, such metrics.
Right. And when talking about growth, I think there's a lot of startups are now focusing on growth, but in your opinion, how would you rate the level of awareness uh, in the startup's growth concepts, especially in Southeast Asia? Uh, Arun, what do you think?
I definitely think it's picked up quite a bit in the last few years. It was quite, I think the growth community was actually still quite small. If you look back like 8 years, even around the time when Carousell was like starting off, but definitely developed quite a bit because of like there have been a lot of programs. I think Google had some programs as well to sort of like train up these fresh graduates to understand growth concepts better. And with like more growth startups coming out, more startups coming out in the region, I think collectively the awareness on like marketing and growth in general has definitely been elevated in the more recent years. Yeah.
What do you think, Harry? On
Yeah,
growth?
I think yeah, definitely agree that the growth community have been growing a lot. And then in the past, we see the people tend to focus more on driving cheap installs. But nowadays, we started to see more and more people started to focus more on the key business metrics rather than purely focusing on how many users you will acquire, but focusing on how many quality users you can actually drive.
Yes. So the next question, this will be the last question from the registration. So if all the viewers, if you have any questions that you would like for us to answer, feel free to put your question in the chat box. So the last question, I would also like to ask both of you, how can small scale startups grow into large scale with limited resources? What are some of the do's and don'ts, tips and tricks in user acquisition point of view? We can start with you, Arun.
Sure. I highly recommend, what I said earlier. First, know your customer or your user. Who are they going to be? Who is your product meant to target? And how do you expect them to behave on your platform, right? And then focus on getting your first 100 or 1,000 successful users. And that success should be determined by the actions you want them to perform on your app. What is the magic moment for them? In our early days, our magic moment was actually listing an item and getting it sold. right? And it's a buy sell marketplace. So there's a buyer and a seller. Both are regular consumers, users, and the magic moment is actually just basically to buy an item or to sell an item. So what we wanted was like as many of these early users to experience that first, and to build a group of advocates. So when these users were, achieving the magic moments, naturally they became our advocates, and then word of mouth was the next channel that we really tried to spur on. This can be built into your app, through smart prompts and so on, to share the app, share the item that they have listed, share that moment when they have actually bought an item. Um, these kinds of mechanisms actually help early stage startup even before you start spending money. Now that you've got an understanding of the users, then you can start looking at uh, running campaigns on paid channels, and then look at what are the demographics of the users who are coming in. Do they match this audience? And then it goes through this process of validation and further understanding. So maybe your initial information would then be validated and supported by more data, or then actually you might end up finding more information from the new users that you're pulling in. And the whole process should be iterative in the beginning, for you to have this understanding so that you can continue driving more quality and valuable users into the app. And I think the most important thing that you do need to focus on is tracking. Don't neglect it, especially when you're in the app space. Always focus on having things tracked. Without the tracking, you cannot improve, and you can't look back and also understand what went wrong where, especially when it comes to acquisition, right? If, say, things are messed up and you don't know where this whole bulk of poor quality users came from, how are you going to go about, avoiding that in the future, right? Similarly, you want to know where the good quality users are coming from as well, so you can double down on that. So I think those are things that you really need to focus on. I would say what you shouldn't do is immediately ramping up, right? You need to start spending, especially when you're small, get that data, and then after that, you can ramp up when you're truly certain about the users that you want to acquire.
Any tips from you, Harry?
Yes, as Arun mentioned, tracking is really important especially if you are in the mobile app and game space. So make sure that you have everything tracked in day one, even though you are unsure maybe certain events if you want to track or not. Do some more experiment, like get them tracked first, so that you have all those data accumulated initially, and then once you have a group of users, you can track backwards to see and validate if certain of your assumptions works or not. And then on top of that, I think for the what don't do for startup, I think definitely don't try to go big scale immediately. So do some small tests first. Test and validate your idea. If it works, then slowly scale up. Don't just scale and forget it.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you for your answer, Carrie and Arun. Next up, I will invite Jiashin back to the stage.
Hello. Thanks so much for sharing. I think I learned a lot myself as well. So now we are going to move on to some of the questions that are coming in from the live chat. So I think on the same note, you're talking about tracking metrics. So we have a question from our YouTube chat. Ahmed is asking how to read these metrics. I assume it's what are some common metrics that are important to track for apps, and when do you know the best time to pivot? So I think for Arun, earlier on, you were talking about how Carousell in the beginning, they were focusing on fashion category, and then afterwards we moved on to like property and cars. So yeah, do you have any advice you would like to share?
Sure. So it wasn't so much of a pivot for us, right? Because we are a general classifieds player. That means we are on all your general classifieds categories and also the verticals like autos and property and so on. I think when it comes to reading metrics, it's more of understanding, again, do these metrics make sense to your business objective? Say if you are a gaming app, and maybe Harry can talk more about this actually, ideally we'd want them to at least register, at least play a game, and then slowly you'd want to move towards them making a single in-app purchase, right? Because then that's important to you as a gaming business. For us, my example was that, we want liquidity in the marketplace. Liquidity for us is that, if user A lists an item, user B buys an item, you want this to keep happening there. So we need to make sure that there are enough new users coming onto the platform who are starting their first chat, or users coming onto their platform who will list their first item. And then we will obviously do everything else that's required to help them buy and sell, showing, increasing the visibility of the item, or recommending it to the buyer, or actually recommending sellers to list more of certain types of items, right? That's like your downstream actions after you've acquired the user in. So at different stages, you obviously look at different metrics. And then when it comes to pivoting, I think I might need some more clarity on that question for pivoting. But if you're going to pivot on a strategy or your product or your business strategy, like you're changing your product completely into something else, then that needs to, again, it's more of a business objective rather than like a marketing one. I think the marketing one should be aligned with your business objective at the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think to add on, if you were to talk about mobile apps and games, some of the common metrics the marketers will be looking at will also be retention rate, day 1 retention rate, day 7 retention rate, day 30 retention rate, engagement time, and the conversion rate to some of your business related events as well. So there are some industrial, there are some free tools for you to see how you stand out in the competition. So say, for example, if for retention rate, you may refer to some third-party tracking analytic tools to see how you stand versus a different tier of like competitors, to see like maybe the top 10%, what's that retention rate look like, and then the mid funnel apps, what's their retention rate looks like.
Thank you so much. I think we have a next question. This is pretty interesting. So Nick asked, when marketing the same app for Android versus iOS users, should we use the same strategy or a different one? It's open to the both of you.
I think the strategies don't need to be particularly different, because you ultimately have one product, right? If your app is a singular product and it's offering the same services, why should it differ? But then perhaps your channel mix might change. Obviously, if you've got many different channels outside of Google, then you just want to make sure that you are driving quality users across all your channels, and that's where you might want to refocus or reallocate your budgets at a higher level. But I guess if you are focusing on just the Google channels that like Harry mentioned earlier, talked through, I don't think you have to change it up so much, and I think Harry can answer this better.
Yeah, so I think if you talk about overall strategy, it shouldn't differ too much, because that's the same product you are running. It's just on different platforms. But if you talk about campaign specific on Google Ads app campaign platform, there are some slight differences, because on Android platform, there's inventory from Play Store as well. So whereas for iOS platform, there's no Play Store, there's App Store. So the type of creative that you will have for your campaign will be slightly different, as I shared earlier as well. So for iOS, maybe you will you need to have more focus on the image and video creatives. Where on Android, it's also recommended to have this, but initially it may not be that important compared to the iOS platform. And in terms of the CPI and CPA price, there are some slight difference as well. For iOS platform, what we see here is usually the average CPI price slightly higher compared to the Android platform as well.
Really interesting. But I think the main takeaway is that the strategy should remain the same because it's the same product, that it's the same app across both platforms. Yep. Just being conscious of time, I think we are overrunning a little. So I think we have time for one last question. So there's a question by Coders Mojo. What are some of the user acquisition channels the startups should start with for online platforms? I think there are so many out there right now. Yeah. So are there any recommendations?
I guess I'll go. I think definitely Google should be one of them. If, for example, if I had all the app campaigns and the app install campaigns back in 2015 when we were ramping up paid acquisition for acquiring new users for Carousell, growing the user base, and that would have made life a lot more easier, to be honest. Back then, we had to set up campaigns separately across your display, your search, and your YouTube. And actually, there probably wasn't even app install campaigns for YouTube back then. Now things have become a lot easier, so I think that's definitely one channel you need to check the box for. And then definitely, depending on your market, there will also be perhaps other local publishers and also your social channels like I don't know, Facebook, Pinterest, and so on, that might also drive some users for you. So I think you should start with those because you should go with channels where you can, I think if you're trying to run it in-house, and usually as a startup, you're running your marketing in-house, your team should be capable of easily setting it up in-house. And I think these kinds of channels are quite easy. Ultimately, there are also like other sources like your ad networks and so on, which basically has the same kind of traffic that you might get from even your Google channels. So I would advise to still start with Google first before going to your ad networks, and they maybe can supplement more traffic later on if that's what you are going for.
Yeah, thanks, Arun. Definitely, I will recommend you to start with Google Ads if you are setting up app campaigns. As you have seen on my previous presentation of how easy you could set up a mobile app campaign. But as a startup, you can also experiment with a few like networks to try what works best for you.
Yeah, I think those are really great insights. I hope we help answer the questions that questions you had. So yeah, I think that's all the time we have today. Once again, thank you so much to all three of you, Arun, Harry, and Laura, for taking time to share your insights and your knowledge with our community. So meanwhile, as I wrap up the session, I'll be moving you backstage. Any last words you'd like to share?
No, okay.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you'd like to rewatch this session, you can always check it out on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. And also stay connected with us by signing up to our mailing list on our website and follow us on our social channels. And lastly, do let us know what you thought about today's session. Just simply scan the QR code or fill in the link, fill up the form in the link. And we'll be selecting 5 lucky winners to receive some virtual gifts. So don't forget to check in your inbox next week. Until then, do stay tuned for our upcoming events on our website and social channels. And we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.